Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 24 playthrough of the Buffalo Wings. And we have finally made it to the start of free agency 2042 to 2043. Honestly, we've done a lot of the heavy lifting already with one trade that we made to bring a young third baseman onto the squad, and then re-signing several of our players. Some of those signings you like, some of those signings some of you do not like. We'll talk about that a little bit here at the top of the episode. But as free agency begins, you can see we've got a little bit of money to spend in theory. But the main reason we have that money to spend at this point is that we have cut our scouting and development budgets back by $2.5 and $3 million from where they were a year ago. We'd like to get them closer to those levels. So really, we have very little money available as free agency starts. It's not spring training time quite yet. So I don't think it's going to be a very active free agent period here for our Buffalo Wings. Did want to talk about a couple of things that came up in the comments to the last few episodes. Jackhammer Possessor mentioned Austin Britz as a potential pitching prospect that we should think about signing. And I agree with that because Austin Britz, as you can see, is at least willing to think about a minor league contract. But Austin Britz is actually someone who has come up through our organization. He spent the last 3 years in Albany. He's been excellent each of those 3 years. He's a guy who was a scouting finding for us 9 years ago, has come up through our system, and he was on a major league contract, but he's now out of option years. And given that we didn't want to guarantee the major league contract to somebody who probably wasn't going to make our 26-man roster, since he's had plenty of opportunities to make it over the last 3 years, and despite his good profile, he never has. So we let him hit free agency. But as Jackhammer Possessor noted, he's possibly willing to sign for only a minor league contract. And if we can stash him back in AAA as an insurance policy, we would happily do that. So you can see he's the first player that we've offered a free agent contract to in this offseason. Second thing is the re-signing of Nate Ruckle. Patrick DeBonis in particular didn't like that re-signing, thought we kind of went with a different approach than we did 4 or 5 years ago when Lauren Walborn, a similar role, a left-handed stopper, was headed to free agency, and we didn't re-sign him, and we did re-sign Mr. Ruckle this time, so he didn't like the logical inconsistency, I think, in our approach to the two different players, but I think they're two different markets. When we were looking before free agency as the potential left-handed pitchers who were going to be free agents, Zion Prescott was the one that we looked at and saw and said, he's the closest thing to Ruckle that's out there. And certainly when you look at Prescott, almost 35 years old, good profile, 2 pitches, some positive personality traits. And over the course of his major league career, he's put up a 1.20 ERA plus and a 91 FIP minus. So he would be a perfectly good left-handed option for us to potentially go after. Looking for about $6 million. So if there's not a bidding war for him, can probably get him for a little bit less than that. But I prefer to go with the bird in hand in Mr. Ruckle. Similar pitching ratings, I would prefer Ruckle's to Prescott's, and can compare the two of them here right now. You can see Ruckle's stuff a little better, movement much better, but his control admittedly not as good. Ruckle does have a 3-pitch arsenal, but Prescott's fastball is better than Ruckle's. They're almost exactly the same age. You can see they're only their birthdays are about 2.5 weeks apart. So Ruckle is 35. Prescott will be 35 in just a couple of days. So I think they're similar players, but I prefer Ruckle, and Ruckle with a 124 ERA plus and an 80 FIP minus over the course of his career, a little bit better than what Prescott has done over the course of his career. Now, granted, we did spend $9 million to lock up Mr. Ruckle, so we definitely spent more on him, but I preferred to go with the bird in hand, who I think his profile is a little better, throws a little harder, and has proven he can do it in the big city of Buffalo. And as far as, Ruckle's contract, it's a 2-year deal with a team option for next year. So if things go south with him real quickly, we can get out of it. But with the left-handed pitchers that were likely to be on the market, I liked Ruckle better than any of them. Patrick suggested, well, you didn't know what was going to happen in terms of international free agents or trade opportunities, and that's true. I mean, I think if, you're hoping that a top left-hander just shows up in international free agency, that's probably a bit of a hope trade. Certainly there's quality left-handers around we could have tried to trade for, but I decided to go on the path of bringing back Mr. Ruckle. Last thing to talk about, and this also goes back to free agency, and it's something that Wyme943 has brought up, and others honestly have also brought up, not just in the most recent episode, but in the last few episodes. And that's, what do we do with kind of our corner infield and corner outfield spots? A lot of people, including Wyme943, have suggested that we at least consider moving on from our first baseman, Mr. Roas, suggesting that a left-handed hitter would probably fit our lineup better, and Roas also makes a good amount of money, $30 million each of the next 2 years. He's the highest paid player on our team. Roas has been real productive his first 2 years in Buffalo, 130 WRC plus overall over those 2 seasons. And when I look at what we could get for trade in Roas, and I looked at this in a previous episode, it's not really all that much. We can get the contract off the books, but we're not going to get anything that exciting in return. It would open up money for us to spend on a left-handed free agent, or we could also tap the trade market. But when I look at Rojas' ratings, even though he's a right-handed hitter, he's still a pretty darn useful bat against right-handed pitching, particularly with his consistent ability to draw a lot of walks. And another guy on the team where there has been similar discussions is the right-handed hitting outfielder Juan Romero, who we decided not to offer a real long-term contract to, and he ended up opting into the qualifying offer that we gave to him for 1 more year, which is completely fine. Love to have a captain who's an Iron Man back, guy who's led Buffalo in ribbies each of the 4 seasons he's been here. Similarly to Mr. Rojas, when we look at Romero, not real dramatic differences between his splits between left-handed pitching and right-handed pitching. Like Rojas, definitely better against left-handed pitching, but still has a bat that is pretty useful against right-handed pitching, and he has kind of proven that over the years with us. So a long-winded way of saying, and I'll put the proper filter on here to talk about the opportunity set, but when we look at the left-handed bats that are available, none of them blow me away. We know Bobby Bolig. He's been with us for a long time. Phil Gibbons is somebody that I think Wyme943 and some others have brought up. I like the durability, and I do like the fact that he's a good bat against right-handed pitching. But you look at that profile right there, and to me it doesn't jump off the page compared to what we already have with Rojas and Romero. And Gibbons is probably the least talented defensive player of those. and he's going to be making more than Romero, a little less than Roas. I like Mike Markel also, a guy who's looking for $15 million, but another guy, when we look at his profile versus right-handed pitching, it's maybe borderline slightly better than what we have with Roas and Romero, but it doesn't blow me away. And I can go on and on with some of these other guys. Jake Spring is one also. And as we get kind of further down in the ratings, there's a couple other left-handed batters. Our old buddy Mike Heiner, a little bit of pop in the bat of Rodolfo Carmona. There's a lot of decent left-handed batters out there, but Roas and Romero have both done it for us in the past. And as much as theoretically and conceptually I would like another left-handed bat in the lineup, I think those guys are proficient enough against right-handed pitching that I'm not really inclined to do something right now. Now, when I highlight Bolig, Gibbons, Markel, Spring, and a few others, there is a part of me that if 3 months from now one of these guys is still on the market and we can bring them on board on a minor league deal like we did with Bolig this past spring, or for a very cheap major league deal, I think I'd consider using the $7-ish million we have, which, as I talked about, I'd like to be lower than that, but whatever money we have left at that time, if one of these left-handed bats is still out there a few months from now at a bargain price, I think that's something that we might pursue. But right now, against some of your better judgment, I know I'm not really inclined to do all that much. I think we're going to ride with this team for another season. Won 99 games this past year. Did come up short in the NLCS. But as I kind of talked about in the last episode, we don't have a lot of long and expensive commitments at this point. So if things don't work out and we need to pivot into a retool or a rebuild mode, I don't think it's hard for us to do that. But we're largely, with the exception of Alexis Mendoza, who admittedly is a big-time starting pitcher, bringing back the exact same team that we had a year ago, with potentially a new young catcher in Mr. Ramirez, potentially a good new young third baseman, if I can find him, in Ramiro Medina. So we've made a few improvements, I think, potentially to the offense, and it's going to be a relatively quiet free agent period for us. At least that's conceptually what I've decided to do right now. But things can change. And with that, we're going to get things underway. We're going to have the Rule 5 draft in a little less than a month. We've got international amateur free agents coming up after that. We'll probably look at both of those things in this episode. And we'll keep monitoring the trade market. I'm sure or the free agent market. I'm sure we'll get some trade offers offline. I'll be perusing the other rosters and doing player searches and all the stuff I usually do to try to find interesting trade targets to always improve the team. But I tend to think it's going to be a pretty quiet free agent period because I don't think the players that are out there are largely better than the players that we have on the team right now. And we've already spent a good chunk of the money that we might have had in this free agent period to retain those players on our roster that we like better. And a lot's been happening here in the first couple weeks of free agency. We haven't done anything. We have gotten a couple scouting reports back, though, on international free agents that we talked about before. Yoshimori Sagakuchi, the shortstop. Question how much he's going to hit. He's honestly somewhat similar to some of the other young infielders we have on our major league team right now. The bat's kind of borderline. He's got the versatility to play multiple positions with the glove, some good personality traits. If he lingers on the market, or if he were willing to eventually sign a minor league contract, I'd consider bringing him on board. But I do question, with the below average contact and lack of ability to draw walks, whether he's really going to hit enough to be a useful major league player. Didn't mention Alfredo Medina at the top of the episode, but he's another one of the left-handed batters who's in the mix for us. 27-year-old, looking for $5.5 million, coming over from Cuba. We're up to high scouting accuracy on him. Would like to get it to very high, just to have a better sense of what his batting profile would look like. Like his defensive ability, like that he's above average in terms of his speed, like the durability. The bat is marginal-ish. He is better against right-handed pitching than left-handed pitching, but again, you look at that bat and you compare it to Roas and Romero, and I think I prefer Roas and Romero. So don't know that we're going to give him $5.5 million, but we're going to keep scouting him, hopefully find out a little bit more. It's possible someone else will sign him. If they do, as I mentioned, there's a lot of decent first base / corner outfield left-handed hitting bats out there. And right now, if we're going to bring one of them on board, my hope is to do it at our price. And as we've talked about in previous episode, don't like a couple of those personality traits for Mr. Medina also. Alexis Mendoza is gone. We didn't make any effort to retain him. Signed with the Giants for 7 years, $21.6 million a year for the first 4 years, and then he's got opportunity to opt out when he's 33 years old. As we talked about, we knew he was going to be making over $20 million a year. He's fragile in terms of his injury proneness. He's going to turn 30 next year. And we've invested heavily in starting pitchers in the draft and international amateur free agency for the better part of a decade. So want to give some of those players an opportunity. So it stinks to lose Mendoza, but it was the cost of doing business for us. And we did at least get a supplemental first-round pick for him, which we'll be using next year after making the qualifying offer to him. So winter meetings are coming soon. And we'll also find out exactly at that point how much more money. Well, I guess we find out now with the addition of him into the mix. Probably want to set aside a little bit extra money into the draft budget with that second first-round pick that we'll have coming up. So that further limits our potential financial flexibility. And I know that some of you don't like me putting that money aside in player development, but I like to do it. Just to keep myself honest so I don't make a mistake and not end up spending the money on somebody else through a trade or free agent signing when I'm not thinking and trying to rush through an episode, or I'm just not thinking about things, and then all of a sudden I'm in a bit of a pinch when it comes to signing players out of the draft next year. Don't want to find myself in that position. And we've made it to the Rule 5 draft, preparing to make our first pick at the 30th pick of the first round here. And we've already got 39 players on our 40-man roster with the players that we had to or chose to retain ahead of the Rule 5 draft. So we're only going to be picking one guy this year. You can see there's a pretty big sheet of alleged 3-star pitchers who are available, so a lot of options if we wanted to put somebody else in the mix for our bullpen. Given that I like our pitching, and part of the reason we were willing to move on from Mendoza and Polite was, most importantly, the money that they were going to be making, to be fair, but also secondarily the fact that we've got a lot of good young pitchers in our organization, and we feel like we can replace them. So I think that conceptually might be more likely to take a flyer on a batter with some potential, but we will figure that out and let you know what we decide to do. And I've made my choice on what we're going to do with this pick, but I know sometimes some of you like to see who the scouting director would recommend for us. And scouting director doesn't recommend that we do anything. If they were to recommend that we would do a pitcher, I guess if they say if we ask them a position, if they don't think we should do something, apparently they just don't think we should do something. So we won't be able to get their knowledge on that. If we were going to go with a pitcher, it was going to have been Juan Castanhedo, a 30-year-old out of Venezuela, a guy with a 4-pitch arsenal, could start in a pinch. Those third and fourth pitches, the changeup and sinker, aren't quite major league quality, and his stamina isn't that great. But if we had to start him, he's capable of doing it. But plus stuff, plus movement, plus control, generally good personality traits. Iron Man as far as his injury proneness. Hasn't spent a ton of time in the majors at the age of 30, soon to be 31. I think he's who we would have gone with if we were going to do a pitcher. But as I kind of hinted at before I took my break to really do my due diligence, we were leaning towards doing a hitter. And we're going to bring on Jamie Zlato, 26-year-old in the Cubs organization, first baseman / outfielder, a guy who's a left-handed hitter, and his profile against right-handed pitching is decent. Certainly not quite as good as even some of those left-handed hitters that are on the open market that we've talked about, and probably not as good as Roas and Romero either, but would give us an extra left-handed bat to at least have in camp. He's durable. He does have that really good gap power, and although he's not a particularly good base runner or base stealer, he is pretty fast, so that will allow him to take some advantage of the gap power. Don't know that he's going to make our 26-man roster, but I think that Zlato's at least worth bringing into camp. So we are going to go ahead and draft Zlato and then move on. Ooh, and we lost a player, Kevin Hale. Yeah, we were short on players that we could save. Hale is one that I looked at that I liked. Go back at his history. Oh, I guess we picked him up in a trade. Oh, and we traded Jesus Rivera at the beginning of this season because he was out of options. Hale was the guy that we brought back to at least get something. I did look at him. He was certainly one of the guys who was closer to... He would have been one of the next few guys that we would have retained if we had spots on our 40-man roster, but we didn't. 26-year-old left-hander, was not good for us last year in Albany. 5.39 ERA over 133 and 2/3 innings. Has the stamina to start, but really doesn't have the third pitch that he needs to start. And as a guy who's going to be 27 years old this upcoming season, didn't feel like putting him on the 40-man roster over some of the other guys who we had an opportunity to keep. Didn't feel like it made sense. So Hale was a guy that we thought we could end up losing, unfortunately, and it looks like it did happen to us, but it is what it is. And post the Rule 5 draft, we've now finally gotten another scouting report back on the center fielder, Alfredo Medina. So very high scouting accuracy now. Not really a lot has changed in terms of his profile. If he lingers on the market and he's much cheaper, we'd consider bringing him in. If he was ever willing to go for a minor league contract, we certainly would consider that. But right now, we kind of have Edgar Canales, the 24-year-old international free agent signing from 2035, who's likely to make our team, given that we need a left-handed bat as a left-handed bat in the outfield. Like his range, like his speed, not the greatest power hitter and the greatest eye in the world, but still good contact, not going to strike out a ton. Hit 285 and 291 with 16 and 20 homers, 25 and 30 doubles the last couple of years in AAA. And when we look at his profile, he's definitely more proficient against right-handed pitching than he is against left-handed pitching. So Canales is another guy who is in the mix, and given that we also just made the Rule 5 acquisition of another left-handed bat, we're not going to push harder than we need to potentially sign Medina, especially with him looking for $5 million. Just don't think that incrementally he is much of a pickup for those $5 million over Canales, who's only making $720K, and it's conceivable that Canales is even a better player. So from that perspective, we're going to wait on Medina at this point. And as the calendar turns to January, continuing to do our final scouting of some of the international amateur free agents. But Darnell Pompey, as expected, has moved on, signed a pretty big contract, almost $11 million a year for 3 guaranteed years with the Red Sox. The Wolf, who has had 2 separate stints with us, relatively brief stints both times, was 5-0 with a 4.72 ERA for us this time around. 32 years old, fragile in terms of his injury proneness, so still a very high-end reliever, but we preferred to spend our money differently, including bringing back the left-handed reliever Ruckle. And I know I don't do it every year because I don't pay all that much attention to it, but for those of you who are interested, take a look at the Hall of Fame voting this year. Spencer Strider, inducted in his first year eligible. Vlad Guerrero Jr., close. Noda Machado, Noda Harper, Noda Otani, Noda Lindor, no to Rodon, who was dropped. No to Garrett Cole, who has been dropped. A few more familiar names from our team, way down. Adley Rutschman doesn't seem to be anywhere close getting a sniff of the Hall of Fame. Hayden Yinger dropped on his first year on the ballot, as was Andrew Painter and Adrian Morejon. So some familiar names from our past. Got some Hall of Fame votes, but will not be enshrined in Cooperstown unless 20 or 30 years from now I get together with Tony La Russa and some of my friends and decide to put some of the undeserving Buffalo Wings in the wing next to the likes of Harold Baines. And we've made it to the start of the international amateur free agent period, so after I review a few players, we'll call it an episode here. I know some of you wait for this time of year and like to opine on what we should do and always find the feedback helpful. So for anyone who's willing to share where they think we should go when we've looked at some of the top players, always interesting for me to hear those perspectives. Only 4 pitchers we're going to talk about. Luis Sanabria, not a guy that we've scouted all that closely. Looks like he's got the potential arsenal to be a starter if the curve or the changeup develops. Just really question whether his movement and control are going to be high enough quality for him to really be a useful guy at the major league level. The 3 guys that we have recently been bringing into camp, Julio Guerrero is the lowest regarded. Another guy who's going to be a borderline starter at the major league level, most likely, needs to develop that circle change to have any shot at doing it. Don't view him as a real high-end prospect, but similar to Sanabria, not looking for a ton of money. Similarly, Arturo Villarreal, looking for less than $200,000. Going to be reliant on a change and or a knuckle curve developing to get a 3 to 4 pitch arsenal. But he's a lefty. Looks like he could be a useful guy at the back end of the rotation. He's durable. A little older. He's going to be turning 18 in a few months, but only looking for $190K. league interest on him is a little lower than the other guys. Think if we go for one of these pitchers, Villarreal probably the one. And then Luis Garza is kind of the high ceiling, low floor prospect. He's already fragile in terms of his injury proneness. He potentially has a brilliant 4-pitch arsenal, but if that curve and the change don't develop, he's got a meh 2-pitch arsenal with the fastball and the sinker that we don't have quite the same high-end potential. Stuff could be still off the charts, particularly if that curve and changeup actually do develop. Real good movement on his pitches. The concern with him is his control. Does have pretty good stamina, like the high work ethic. Throws in the low to mid 90s already. Certainly the most interesting of the pitching prospects, but league interest in him is very high, looking for $2.2 million. If we decided to go higher end, I think it's probably Garza. If we decide to pinch our pennies on the pitching, boy, that was a lot of alliteration unexpectedly right there. I think Villarreal probably the way that we would go. Batters, as always, a much deeper pool of hitters. We'll start with a couple of guys that we have scouted off and on who aren't as highly regarded. David De La Fuente, center fielder, like the range, like the personality traits, a little bit of speed. Bat looks like it could be borderline useful. Switch hitter, don't think he's a superstar, but think he could be a useful player. I'll look at the other guys that I'm not as serious about, that I haven't scouted as much either. You may see the reasons why. Juan Lamas, pretty generic corner outfielder in terms of his profile. Montrell Clemente, 17-year-old catcher, awful defensively. Bat, not that interesting. Cody Anglesi. I'm not going to sign him because I just don't want to have to pronounce that name. Center fielder, like the work ethic, decent range, not a ton of speed. Bat with plus contact, plus gap power, and plus home run power. Looks marginally useful. Not all that exciting. Julio Aguirre is a guy that we had scouted a little more aggressively in the beginning, brought him into a camp or two. But with a low work ethic, poor defense, poor speed, and overall an unspecial bat, even though he will be able to hit a few homers and draw a few walks. Not all that excited about him. So those are the 3.5-star prospects here, at least ones whose names begin with L or earlier in the alphabet. I can show you that there's a few others down there. Nobody that we've scouted all that aggressively. I think profile-wise, Jesus Elvera, just with the potential excellent home run power and the really good outfield range, is one of the more interesting ones. Luis Mosqueda, again, the home run power stands out, but there's just not a lot else that goes with it. I mean, if Mosqueda wasn't looking for $1.7 million, he'd be somebody to think about on the margins. But him and Olvera, by virtue of that big home run power potential, are two of the more expensive ones on the lower end of the list there. So don't really love anybody here so far. Nelson Bellatin, 16-year-old out of Panama, kind of has the Deshaun Seifu profile, but he doesn't have the speed or the defensive ability or the personality that Seifu had. Probably not a direction that we would go, but the price at $450,000, he is maybe a guy we take a flyer on. Mauricio Rayo, left-handed hitting first baseman, durable, a little pop in the bat, no speed, no defense, not that exciting. And then Edgar Guerrero, also a 3.5-star prospect like Rayo. A little more interesting bat, pretty well balanced, durable, decent outfield range, a little speed, left-handed hitter. Not all that exciting. And unfortunately, although there's these 3 5-star prospects sitting here that we haven't talked about, I'm not really in love with any of them either. So I could definitely use your help on which direction to go here. Gilberto Sandoval, second baseman. Like the contact and the home run power, those things are very positive. Just don't really know where I would play the guy. He's borderline for a first baseman at 6 feet tall. I do like the bat. Not a lot of speed. Very borderline playable even as a left fielder with that profile. So I think he's kind of a DH slash first base slash left fielder who's pretty mediocre defensively at any of those positions. I think first base, he's at least got the 50 range and the 45 error, even though his reach at 6 foot tall is not going to be incredible. So I think first base is probably his best defensive position. The 75 contact and the 65 home run power potential do stand out. Don't know a lot about his personality, but think he's probably on the short list of guys that I like more. Ignacio Botello, right fielder, extreme home run power, potentially off the charts. Mediocre defensively, not a lot of speed, and everything else about his bat is mediocre. If the contact and the eye both do develop to 50 and he gets that crazy home run power, he's useful. Whether or not that's going to happen with a 17-year-old where we don't think he's got high work ethic or know much about his other personality traits, who knows what's really going to happen. And then Luis Arrieta, 16-year-old out of the Dominican, like his outfield range, like his durability, decent speed, decent bunter, and a potentially interesting bat if everything develops. So I think if I was going to go high end, Arrieta and Sandoval are kind of the way I'm leaning among the batters. And then among the pitchers, certainly Garza if I was going to go high end, Villarreal if I was going to go a little more budget oriented. So if you have thoughts on what your plan would be in international amateur free agency, always interesting and useful for me to hear those. I'll probably be doing the next episode within the next 12 or 13 hours of when I post this. So if you haven't opined by that time, I'll appreciate the feedback, but it likely won't be factored into my episode. And until that next episode, thanks so much for watching and hope you have a great day.